Welcome, my name is Justin Klein and I'm going to briefly go over my capstone project. It's utilizing graphic software to improve the quality and quantity of writing in first grade. The instructional problem. I said that emergent writers often lack fluency in terms of their ability to manually compose text. And I work with first grade students about 6, 7 years old. A lot of them are still struggling with their fine motor skills, have trouble holding their pencil, and the result of that is that students' written statements typically lack the level of detail and length of similar oral statements. So if I ask for a response and they respond orally, I tend to get a lot of detail, longer sentences. But if I ask them to write that same response, what usually happens is the students sort of truncate or shorten their statements. They use less details and the sentences get shorter because, what happens sort of is that since it's more difficult for them to write, they'd rather write less because it's easier to write less. My technology-based solution, I chose KidPix Deluxe 4.1 for schools, which is predominantly a graphic software, writing, drawing tools, but it has an application, it has a little simple kid-friendly word processing application where they can use the keyboard to type. And I said that students would use the word processing application to type text versus manually constructing it using pencil and paper. And what I was hoping that is that by typing, since just pushing the letter keys on the keyboard is much easier than manually writing each letter, I was hoping that just typing would increase their writing fluency. And by doing so, by making it easier to write, I was hoping that their writing would contain greater detail and that their sentences would get longer. My objectives. The sort of overall objective is that I hope that students will utilize at least one relevant detail, and I said an adjective, adverb, or prepositional phrase per sentence when composing a paragraph. So I want them to use at least one detail per sentence when writing. In terms of the project, what I wanted when they were using the graphic software, the word processing software, I was hoping that they would use at least 50% more details, okay? 50% more when using the graphic software as compared to handwriting it. Also, what I wanted them to do is with more details, more words, their sentences should get longer. So I was hoping that using the software, their sentences would increase by at least 25% in terms of its length. And lastly, something I didn't mention before is attitude. If the kids are struggling to write, if it's a lot of work to manually handwrite all the text, their attitudes are usually impacted too. If something's hard, they don't like it as much. And I was hoping that using the software, it would increase their attitudes, their positive attitudes with regard to writing. Hoping that at least 75% of the test group would indicate a rating of 3 or higher on a 4-point scale, on a Likert type scale that I created. Preparation. I taught students to use the selected software, and that included teaching them some basic typing skills. I provided direct instruction in terms of using details. If I expected them to use details in their sentences, I wanted them to have a chance to get an idea of what I would be looking for in terms of details for their writing. And lastly, I did some things to help students generate ideas for writing. Keyboard and support tools, you can see what I did to help them teach them writing. I put a green dot on the space bar to help them remember spaces, a blue sticker dot on the period, put the little period on there to help them remember so that I would know when their sentences were ending, and a red sticker on the delete key to help them fix mistakes. You'll see I had a little keyboard support guide here, green, red, blue, just to help remember, some pictures to help them remember what each color did. And here are the sentence ideas that I was talking about, helping them get some ideas for their writing. They're going to be writing about animals, so simple things, simple prompts to help them. What does the animal look like? Where does the animal live, etc. The activities. For the project, they composed 2 paragraphs. The first one was pencil and paper, and that's sort of to give me a baseline assessment. How much do they write? What kinds of details do they use when they're just doing traditional handwriting? And then the second paragraph, I broke that class up. I had 16 kids, so I broke 8 and 8. I made 8 students a test group, and they would do their second paragraph using the software. And the other 8 would be a control group, and I had them do it with pencil and paper. That way I'd be able to compare the test group's software-based compositions against their own handwritten ones, and then the handwritten ones of the control group for the second paragraph. And then after each paragraph, the first and the second one, I had them complete a writing attitude survey. Again, the Likert scale, just to get a sense of how much they enjoyed writing. That way, I could compare their enjoyment with writing with the handwritten ones versus the graphic software. Yeah, here's just a writing sample, give you an idea what it looks like. This is the kid picks, so you can put backgrounds, and since the second paragraph they're writing about underwater animals, I picked a nice background. You can see that she wrote about crabs. My analysis, what I did was I counted and compared the number of details used in each paragraph. So I compared the handwritten number of details versus the software-based compositions. I counted and compared the average number of words per sentence. So were they writing longer sentences or shorter sentences with the graphic software? And again, I compared the writing attitude assessments to identify any changes. Did they like it more when they used the software? Did they like it less? And my results. My first three students, 1, 2, and 3, were my low-level writers. 4, 5, and 6 were my middle-level writers, and 7, 8 were my high-level writers. Blue is their handwritten, and purple is the graphic software compositions. And this one's the total number of details used. So you can see, using the graphic software for my low and my middle writers, I actually got great increases. All 6 of these kids met that 50% increase that I was hoping for. The interesting thing, something I didn't expect but it makes sense, is that my high-level writers, you can see 7 stayed the same and 8 even went down. And I really believe the reason for this is that these kids were already sort of fluent in terms of their ability to handwrite things, and having them type actually slowed them down. Searching for the keys and stuff slowed these kids down, and since it was more difficult for them to type, they actually use less details. They would rather do less because it was easier to do less with the software. This is the number of kids, or the percentage of kids who used at least one detail in each sentence. In the handwritten one, only 25% met that objective. And these were the 2 high kids. When they handwrote it, they used at least one detail in each sentence. All the other kids, the low and middle level kids, didn't use at least one in each sentence. And what's funny is that it flip-flopped exactly when we did it with the software. This time 75% met that objective, then that's all the low and the middle kids. When they used the graphic software, they used at least one detail per sentence, whereas the high kids actually this time did not use a detail. Again, I think it's because it was more difficult for them to type. Typing slowed them down, so they wrote shorter sentences and used less detail. This is the average number of words per sentence. Now all 6 kids, my low and middle kids, they all increased, but some of them didn't increase so much. I think only 4 out of those 6 kids met that 25% increase that I was hoping for, and my high kids actually decreased significantly. And again, I think that's because they became less fluent when they were using the software, and as a result, since it was more difficult for them to type, what they did was they wrote less. It was easier to write less. And for these, I think it didn't grow quite as much for a lot of them because, if they've got an 8 or 9 word sentence and they only add one more word for that detail, that's not going to give you the 25% I was looking for. Handwritten paragraphs, these are their attitudes. And at the beginning, I had 75% who marked a 3 or 4. I think part of that is they're just trying to, please their teacher. And honestly, these kids, for the most part, really like being at school. So, they said they liked writing, even though sometimes I can see that, they're not so happy doing it. But this was the handwritten ones, and 25% indicated a 1 or a 2. When we did the graphic software, all 100% said that they liked writing. And even some of the kids who did, for example, a 3 in here, some of them even moved up to a 4 using the graphic software. So it did really seem to impact their attitude positively. And lastly, future improvements. I talked a lot about writing fluency. It's kind of my thing. I said that, if they can write more fluently, I felt like they were going to use more details because it was easier. But the funny thing is, I didn't have any evaluation tool within my whole project to measure it. So I said that in the future I'd develop an evaluation tool to measure students' writing fluency. Something simple, perhaps how many words they compose per minute, handwriting and typing. That way I could get a better indication if it really was the fluency that helped them, or maybe just the motivation of the software.